So, Alan, apologies to everyone listening in. It's just our building evacuation alarm system being tested. Maybe we'll kick off and just pause as soon as we hear any interruptions.
Okay.
So, Alan.
Yep, not a problem. Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining our November webinar. I hope everyone has their cups of coffee ready to go. And please note that we will be recording our webinar today, and you'll receive an email with a link to download the video afterwards. Okay, so we can head to the next slide.
Sorry, I'll do that for you now. You're going to outline that for us, Sue Ellen, or would you like me to kick off?
Oh, yep. Okay. Andrea, has that slide changed for you?
Yeah, I'm seeing
Okay.
today.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, this month, Gary will be answering the questions, are contractors really the problem? And how high can we stack IBCs? After which Andrea will be discussing artificial stone benchtops, a recent toxic workplace culture conviction, and the move to replace gas with electric cooktops and heating. But first, Gary will be presenting our questions of the week. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you very much, Sue Ellen. Welcome everyone once again. So I've got two questions of the week, and there's questions of the month, of course, as well, today. First one, can we use non-fluorescent uniforms for our high visibility PPE, personal protective equipment requirement? Was a recent question posed to one of our team here, and I think quite a genuine question. So in the picture image here on screen, hopefully you can see, at the top is a non-fluorescent high visibility bit of clothing, and below is the traditional ones that we see, which are high visibility, fluorescent type. So there's question one. You can think about this over the next 20 minutes, and we'll come back to this at the end of the session. And the second one is, there's a new Australian standard for steel pallet racking. I'll just pause while we test our alarm. There we go. I think it's stopped for the moment. And the question, and a clause in there talks about who can conduct the annual inspections. And somebody contacted me recently and said, oh, the new standard asserts that we are no longer allowed to do internal inspections of our racking. They have to be done by an external specialist. So my question is that true? Many of you listening and joining us each month do have pallet racking. Not everyone, but many businesses do. So we'll come back to those two questions. So let's turn to the topic of, are contractors really the problem? I think this comes out of a lot of discussions. If you think about how you've discussed with colleagues when you're getting contractors in to do anything at all, doesn't matter what it is, they're typically seeing contractors as a problem to be managed. And I sat in on a session with a good friend and colleague, Sue Bottrell, a lawyer based here in Melbourne, and I liked her take on her perspective of contractors. So the first thing is that contractors are vulnerable, and they tend to do the jobs that we are not able to or not willing to undertake ourselves. That's often the case. Everyone says we care about our contractors and we provide safety for everyone, but you know what the reality is? Contractors are selected on price. Every procurement department in every major corporation is trying to drive down cost. I'm not saying inappropriately, but they are driving down cost. So ultimately, contractors are squeezed on price, but you still want them to deliver not only the job, but at the high safety standard that you and your own team would actually apply to that same job if you were doing it. The safety laws, OHS Act in Victoria and WHS Act in all other states and jurisdictions around Australia, have long included that consultation with workers must include contractors. Our experience is it's a low level of inclusion. It may be done, but it's quite a low level for contractors. And they have little control and authority over what they do. So when they experience a problem, we tend to find that they either fuddle their way through, they don't do it to the same way that you would do it or to the same standard, or they don't elevate that concern because they don't feel they have the power or authority to either alter the situation or even to report it. The other thing I find, and I think this is quite genuine, culture is often invisible to those inside that culture. And so we just assume that the contractors that we've engaged fully understand our culture of our business, our attitudes and beliefs, and our risk appetite. Whereas a contractor coming in would think it's okay to whip up a ladder, portable ladder, to reach some valve and do some quick job. And you might be horrified and say, no, you must have a spotter. You must have that cordoned off. You must have a scissor lift to do that job, not a portable ladder. And so the contractors involved in those circumstances might be surprised at your dissatisfaction of how they're performing and doing the job. And so the culture is unknown. I think we need to protect our contractors and not just treat them as a problem to be managed. They're often undertaking the most dangerous, difficult, awkward jobs. And the reason we give it to contractors is because hopefully they've got the specialist skill, equipment, and experience to do that, and we may not, or we choose not to take that on that job. So just briefly, I think what we need to do is to elevate contractors, at least conceptually, to think of them as equal partners and valued partners in the work that we do. You only should look at, we only have workers on this site. We only have workers. We don't have employees and contractors. We have workers, and they ultimately must have the same safety standard and approach. So I just think my first one, are contractors really the problem? No, the inherent risks in the business are the ones that our business has created, not the contractors. They've come in to do jobs in our work environments. And so, in fact, we created the risk. The nature of your business and our business creates those risks, not the contractors. What they're trying to do is cope with it. So that's, I think, a very interesting perspective to think about contractors. So second question is, how high can we stack IBCs? And we received a couple of inquiries from our retainer clients of recent times, and I thought, gee, this is not one inquiry but a couple. So clearly it is not understood out there what are the requirements. And so I think it was Andrea who identified firstly for me that under the Australian standard AS 1940, which is often termed the Flammable Liquids Code, is its short title, in clause 4.7 says you must limit IBCs to too high for IBCs that contain flammable liquids. So what we've got is an authoritative standard that says too high, okay, a maximum of too high when you have flammable liquids. So we now understand that. So that's good advice. However, just understand that is not a legal requirement. It is a best practice, but I think everyone should follow that. So that's good. Then it raises the question, what about other chemicals that are hazardous but not flammable? We've got corrosive, caustic material, we've got acids, we've got a whole host of other things. We have not yet identified an authoritative standard that has actually referenced stacking heights for IBCs. If any of our listeners today is aware of one, please let us know. So my advice would be, let's follow, unless you've got alternate risk assessment that says it's safer, too high seems prudent. Not a legal requirement, not a standard requirement as far as we know, but probably prudent to do so. So now we turn to general goods. So you could be having detergent, soaps, other contents in your IBCs that are not hazardous. So these, once again, we haven't found any authoritative standard. And so for items 2, has other hazardous chemicals, non-hazardous, and empties, we think you should refer to first, the IBC manufacturer. It won't necessarily be the supplier of your chemicals. Sitting out behind the supplier is where they got the IBCs from. And the metal frames around the plastic liners of the IBCs is in fact what's critical for safety for stacking. So the plastic container shouldn't be under any load because it is quite flexible, if you've probably noticed, with IBCs. I'm not sure if I mentioned at the start, I think I see Andrea cringing. I should have said IBC stands for intermediate bulk containers. I think you're going to tell me that, Andrea, were you? You thank you. The images probably show you at least visually what I was referring to with IBCs. So anyone who's got bulk chemicals, so intermediate bulk containers, and this is typically what they look like. They could vary in capacity, but typically around 1,000 litres, but could be 1,500 litres, depending upon the size. And so once again, empty containers is very different to full containers. As long as the stack is stable and we've got no deformation of the metal frame and the manufacturer has not limited the height, then you might go 6 high or something, or even 8 high, possibly in empty stacks. So there's various limits. If you need to know something specific, give us a call or email us and we'll give you more detail on that. So I'll just turn to Andrea. We've got just a couple of topics I think Andrea would like to talk to us on, and if you can turn on your microphone.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, I wanted to just briefly touch on what you might have seen on the block on TV, and the union in Victoria, anyway, Victorian Tradesol Council, certainly didn't like what they said on the block about the engineered stone bench tops. So the hosts on the block gave assurance that the engineered stone bench tops, they implied that they were safe, and they used a reference of saying just like being at the beach, just like the sand at the beach. And of course, the union disagreed with that. The reason being that, you know, the silica, we know that sand is silica, so it's essentially the same substance, but the danger with the engineered stone is when they're being cut and ground, you know, cutting them to size. The fine dust, it's the fine silica dust, which goes deep into the lungs, which can cause silicosis, which we know is certainly increasing in prevalence in the stonemasons. So it is quite dangerous. And you may have also seen news that more recently, Safe Work Australia is supporting a complete ban on the engineered stone. So just update on that
Good
one.
Well, actually, Andrea, just on that point, if I may, if somebody just posed that simple question, they might just think, does that mean it's safe in my home? Is my bench top safe? So you've mentioned cutting and grinding in particular, which I think is the real union's problem and concern, which is a valid one, which you've said. So are they safe in the homes typically, from what you know?
Oh, absolutely. You know, so as long as you're not cutting or, you know, making any fine dust with the bench top, once it's in place and, you know, being used as normal, you know, there's certainly, it would be even safer than going to the beach and breathing in the sand. So those of you that already have an engineered stone bench top at home, you don't need to worry as long as you keep it intact. Don't be cutting or grinding that bench top without proper safety measures in place.
Good, thanks.
Similar to the concerns with silicosis, which is a reasonably new concern, we know asbestos is still a very relevant concern in older buildings. Again, the asbestos, as it sits, as it's intact, it poses very little risk to workers or any other persons. But of course, if the asbestos is cut or disturbed, it's the risk of breathing in those fine asbestos fibers into the lungs, which can cause asbestosis, a serious lung disease. And so we talk about it this month because November is Asbestos Awareness Month. So it's just a reminder at this time of year to check if your workplace does have asbestos, to just check that you do have a current asbestos register. And that you have identified the asbestos-containing materials with signage or labelling in your workplace. Safe Work Australia has recently released a new asbestos registered template, and there's some new guidance. This material it hasn't really changed. Your obligations remain the same, but it's just always helpful to find some new updated templates that you might wish to transfer your material to. Sue Ellen has also posted another helpful link there to some asbestos awareness information. So I encourage you to check that out.
Thanks, Andrea. Just before we leave that, from memory, we've banned the importation of asbestos into Australia for nearly 40 years. So I think it was 1984. It was legally banned to be imported. So where we find it, if I'm right, Andrea, is really very old, typically older buildings, pre-1980s, with AC sheet, what we call AC, asbestos cement sheet, roof walls, interior lining, and sometimes lining under tiles as well. And some tiles. Is that correct? Is that your understanding? Where we typically find these?
It's common to find them sometimes in fire doors, fire-rated doors,
Course,
the
yes.
backing of electrical switchboards,
Yes.
but also in gaskets and these type of things. And also just in a workplace I was working at, we thought all the asbestos had been removed, and the subsequent high-tech new technology, X-ray diffraction, I believe they used on some paint, actually found that there was asbestos embedded in a paint on the roof.
Yep.
So, if there's any uncertainty, given the age of your workplace, it's worth engaging with an expert, and they know all these, these things to actually look for and get testing done.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks for that, Andrea. And I think it came across to me a very interesting recent conviction.
Yes, so this one, and I think it's probably the first of many of these convictions that we might start to see more of, in the relating to psychosocial hazards in the workplace. So the Court Services Victoria were convicted and fined almost $380,000. This was following the suicide of a worker. And also the several other workers that had taken off on stress leave, resulting from what was found to be work anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder that has arisen in those employees as a result of their workplace. The court found that Court Services Victoria, many of their employees had been exposed to traumatic materials throughout the course of work. But the workplace also, the workers were under high stress work, high workloads, long hours, unclear roles and responsibilities, and a culture in the workplace which also there was evidence of poor workplace relationships and inappropriate behaviour.
Andrea, so I notice on those points that you just raised, I smile because if you look at the draft psychological health regulations, which are still not approved yet in Victoria, but are already out in draft, cite exactly those items. So they seem to have matched the draft regulations as the items which were defective in their toxic culture.
Indeed, and so I think this case just serves as an early reminder to all businesses. We've always had this obligation to protect the psychological health of workers. It's already built into our OHS Act in Victoria, and we now have the legislation in other states. So this is just a really important reminder to businesses that you do have a responsibility to identify the psychosocial hazards that can impact your workers. So firstly, identifying those, and then putting measures in place to protect your workers from harm from those hazards that they are faced with.
Thanks, Andrea. That's a good point. If I may say, some of our very progressive friends and clients have already started doing psychological health risk assessments, which will ultimately be required when the draft Victorian regs come into force, and they're to get ahead of the game so that you understand what their risks are, where it is, and what controls they've got in place. So if people are interested in that, they can contact us. Well, we can either give a quote or give them some tips how they might do that internally.
Thanks, Gary. And we are seeing the data tells us that the number of claims for workplace for workers, suffering harm and taking leave for psychosocial illnesses is increasing, which may simply be because of the increased awareness, and workers are now actually putting in claims and taking the time off and hopefully getting the treatment. But we're certainly going to continue to see more focus on these areas. So now's the time to start looking at those in the workplace.
Indeed. Thanks, Andrea.
Now, I'm really excited to talk to you about the World Congress on Safety and Health at Work. This, to my knowledge, is the first time the Congress has been held in Australia, and certainly in my time in Australia. Often we have to travel, over the world. And my colleague in the past had been to Singapore and Germany to participate in the World Congress in Safety and Health. So this year, just in a couple of weeks, it's in Sydney, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to present again. I presented at the Canada Congress a couple of years ago, but that was online. So first time presenting face to face. And I'll be talking about machinery safety and specifically about robots and cobots and the change in safety requirements that we now have as we're really relying a lot on the technology to protect the safety of the workers as we work side by side with the robots. And this all comes together in the stream that I'm presenting in other workers talking about the impact and the fears of the, AI technologies, and also fears about cybersecurity. So it sounds like, to many people, the fear of these, evil robots, causing havoc and harming people is becoming a very real fear. So the stream that I'm talking about, we'll talk a bit about this. But the Safety Congress is actually very broad, covering topics such as psychosocial hazards and all different types of physical and safety hazards in the workplace.
And I recall, Andrea, speaking to you earlier on this, I found it fascinating that what you mentioned to me is that when you talk about robots and collaborative robots that we work with, and we're going to see a lot more of these, and they're going to be in around the workplace, we're hearing of autonomous cars, that you mentioned that people are quite emotive. So when an accident happens, it's as if the robot stalked me and tried to kill me, as opposed to some other failure or some circumstance arising.
Oh, exactly. I was sharing with you a story I read just yesterday about a South Korean worker was unfortunately killed in a factory, and it was reported that the robot killed the worker. The robot essentially, it implies that the robot lifted the worker up and pushed him into a conveyor, which is obviously a tragedy. But of course, as I explained to Gary in reading the article, it was a maintenance worker that was servicing the robot, and immediately I think, and what we know here, we should have isolated the equipment before servicing the equipment.
Yeah, entering the danger area. Absolutely, Andrea. Thanks for that. And so thank you once again, Andrea. So I think our last main topic for today, before we get to questions of the week, is I came across a very interesting article on gas heating and cooking, because we know a number of governments, particularly in Victoria, are looking to wean us off gas and move us all over to fully electric in our homes. And many people, I'm not a cook, but many people think, how the heck can we do a great stir fry with an electric cooking top, as opposed to flames and things of this nature? And I came across an article from RMIT, and I think the next slide is a very excellent example of it. So here they've done a study of a typical 1960s Australian home, poorly insulated, a lot of single glazing in the home. On the right-hand side, you can see in the winter, the reverse cycle air conditioner is pumping 30-degree heated air in at an airflow of 287 litres per second. And let's assume that's typical of our reverse cycle air conditioners. And what you'll notice is the temperature down at floor level is 23 degrees, even though it came into the room at 30, and there's a wind chill effect. Excuse me. And this is what people are noticing. We're pumping a lot of heat into our environment, but I feel cold. And so what they explain is when you have poor insulation and you walk past cold surfaces, whether it be the glass or metal frames of doors or even walls, that your body radiates heat out to those cold surfaces. And so what you'll see here on this one, the return air came in the room at 30 degrees. It's average in the room at 23, and it leaves at about 25. So now it's got heated up about 5 degrees before it pumps it back into the room. So this is obviously infrared and other scans they've used in the room. Same room now, insulated, double glazing, insulated walls and ceiling and possibly floor. Same air temperature being heated air pumped into the room at the same airflow shows a very different, if you like, fingerprint when you look at infrared. So now it's near the floor is 27 degrees and the temperature leaving the room to be reheated is above 26. So the heater doesn't have to work as hard to actually get that. So seeing it on the one slide, uninsulated room to insulated room, is quite dramatic. So I don't have the answer for cooking. I think many of us might have to start doing barbecues or something if we have our gas turned off ultimately for a flame to cook steak or food or something else. But certainly for heating and cooling our houses, I think the answer is to really look at good insulation. You'll actually be more comfortable, and you'll notice that the aircon doesn't have to work as hard to heat or cool your room. So something to think about. So there we go. Now we try and be efficient with our time over a morning cup of coffee. So let's turn to question 1. Non-fluorescent uniforms. These are necessary for some tradespeople. For example, welders and grinding, because they can't wear nylon and polyester type PPE. So almost all of the high-vis clothing that you'll see that is fluorescent is in fact nylon or polyester. And welders and grinders, etc., can't wear that because polyester is a high fire risk. So they have to use natural fibers, but natural fibers are incapable of retaining the fluorescent pigments. So there's a scientific reason why we can't get cotton and other natural fibers to be fluorescent, at least at this stage. So the short answer is, and the other answer, if you like, is there is very few legal requirements to have high vis. We probably overdo it in the workplace, but that's okay, particularly out on the roadside workers. That makes perfect sense, and that would be both contractual as well as under recognised traffic management standards. On your work sites, we probably find it is also overused, where there's not necessarily passing traffic, but we'll make people wear it anyway. So that's okay. That's a company rule. So it's not a legal requirement either to have fluorescent or non-fluorescent, but of course it's recommended to have fluorescent, particularly in high traffic areas. So there's the answer on can we have non-fluorescent uniforms. The answer is you can, but I would reserve it for where we have a pure safety risk like fire safety. We'll reserve it for those. So there's a new Australian standard on steel pallet racking. And what I can tell you is section 5.2.3 states a competent person shall conduct the formal inspections, at least annually. So it does not say that you have to use an external specialist. But section 1.3.8 defines a competent person in part, and it clearly includes your rack suppliers, rack manufacturers, and rack specialist engineers. They'll be automatically accepted under the definition of a competent person. But once again, remember, standards are best practice, they're not law. So as long as you believe your team have been trained and are competent to inspect your racking, then your internal safety team or internal engineering or maintenance team, properly trained, can do your inspections of your racking. So you'll notice that this, I will refer to the annual inspection, which is meant to be a more formal annual review. What you would have is quick walkthroughs, either weekly or monthly, by your local team in your warehouse or wherever. Should be looking at a quick visual inspection, the things that they can quickly and visually see: damaged racking from forklift interaction with columns or beams, for example, or missing safety clips. So this is referring to the proposed annual inspections, which is a formal inspection. So your team can still do it if you believe they're competent. You can train them up to be competent. So there we go. I'll hand back to Sue Allen.
Thank you, Gary and Andrea. So our next webinar will be taking place on December 15th, where our main theme will be motor and driver safety. Next month, we will also be issuing a fact sheet to our retainer clients on whether plastic fuel containers are banned and how long can we store fuel in containers. So that's something to look forward to for our retainer clients. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great weekend. The weather's beautiful today, so enjoy your 31-degree afternoon for those people that have joined us from Victoria. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sue Allen. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Andrea,
Thanks.
as well.
Thanks
Thanks for
everyone.
joining
Have a
us.
great weekend.
Okay, bye. Thank you.